lonely rancher faced his final days, until 4 Apache widows claimed him as husband. Elias Harper had spent most of his life under the wide, open skies of Arizona. His ranch, a vast stretch of land with rolling hills, dry grasses, and scattered cactus, had been in his family for generations. The wooden fences, weathered and worn, leaned slightly under the weight of time, and the barns smelled of hay and leather, carrying the memories of years past. Elias had always been proud of his work. From sunrise to sunset, he tended to his cattle, repaired fences, and kept the land in order. The ranch was more than a livelihood. It was his companion, his teacher, and his constant reminder that life was a rhythm of hard work and patience. But as the years passed, the rhythms of his life changed. His hands, once steady and strong, had grown rough and worn, with fingers that sometimes shook when he lifted heavy tools. His steps had slowed, and he found himself sitting more often on the old wooden porch, gazing at the distant mountains, thinking about the days gone by. Elias was no stranger to loneliness. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 20 years earlier, leaving him with memories of laughter, arguments over small things, and quiet evenings by the fireplace. Their children had grown up and moved to distant cities, busy with their own lives, leaving Elias to face the long stretches of silence on the ranch. Despite the solitude, Elias had found comfort in his routines. Every morning he rose before the sun, fed the cattle, checked the fences, and walked the paths he had known since childhood. He loved the small things, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the sound of a hawk calling in the sky, and the way the sunlight touched the hills in the late afternoon. These moments reminded him that life, even in quiet, had beauty. Yet, even as he appreciated these simple pleasures, a quiet ache lingered in his heart. He realized, sometimes painfully, that he was getting older. His health was not as strong as it once had been, and some nights he lay awake worrying about what would happen if he fell ill, or if the ranch needed work that he could no longer do. The people in the nearby town had always been kind, but they were busy with their own lives. Neighbors waved as they drove past, children occasionally came to see the cows, and a few friends stopped by for a cup of coffee, but these moments were fleeting. Elias often felt like a stranger even in his own world. The ranch, once full of life and voices, echoed with silence. Some evenings he would sit in his worn rocking chair on the porch, staring at the fading colors of the sunset, and whisper to himself stories from the past, as if speaking to ghosts of days long gone. He remembered the times when the house was filled with laughter, the smell of Margaret's cooking, and the sound of children running through the fields. Those memories were sweet, but also bittersweet, reminding him of all that had changed. Despite his solitude, Elias was determined to maintain the ranch. He refused to sell or leave the land, even when friends suggested he move closer to town where life would be easier. The ranch was part of him, and he could not imagine life without it. Every morning he woke with a sense of purpose, feeding the cattle, mending fences, and keeping the land alive. The work was hard, and some days his body ached, but it was a rhythm he understood. He took pride in the fact that he could still manage, even as age weighed heavily on him. His pride, however, sometimes made him stubborn. He disliked asking for help, believing that he must face life's challenges on his own. As the seasons changed, so did the challenges. Summer brought scorching heat, and Elias often worked under the blazing sun, his hat pulled low and sweat dripping from his brow. The cattle needed water, the fences needed repairs, and the land required constant care. In the winter, cold winds swept across the plains, and snow sometimes covered the hills. Even then, Elias refused to stay indoors for long. He would bundle himself in layers of clothing and venture out to check on the animals, shovel snow, or stack firewood. Each day was a test of his strength and endurance, and each night he would fall asleep exhausted but content, knowing he had done what needed to be done. Despite his hard work, there were moments when the weight of loneliness pressed down heavily. On quiet nights, the only sounds were the wind through the trees, the distant cry of an owl, and the low, steady breathing of the cattle in the barn. Elias sometimes spoke aloud, sharing thoughts and memories with no one but himself. "How are you doing today, old friend?" he would ask the land or the barn, as if they could respond. These conversations were his way of keeping his mind alive and staying connected to the world. They reminded him that even in solitude, life continued, and he was still part of it. The local townspeople often remarked on Elias's resilience. They admired his ability to live alone on the ranch, to maintain the land, and to face the challenges of age with courage. But behind the admiration, some felt concern. The old man was strong, yes, but he was human. They worried that if something happened, an injury, illness, or accident, he might not have anyone to help him. These concerns were whispered in coffee shops and grocery stores, but Elias himself remained unaware of the growing worry. He believed that he could handle whatever life threw at him, even if it meant facing the final days alone. Then there were the memories, which both comforted and haunted him. He often thought of Margaret, her smile, her laugh, and the way she would hum while cooking. He remembered the children, now adults, who had once chased each other through the fields and helped with chores. These memories filled him with warmth, but also reminded him of the passage of time. Elias realized that life had changed around him, and he had changed as well. The ranch remained constant, but he could not ignore the fact that he was growing older, and the days of solitude might soon become permanent. As the sun set one particular evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Elias sat on the porch, a cup of tea in his hand. He watched the cattle grazing peacefully and listened to the wind rustle through the grass. In that moment, he felt a mixture of contentment and sorrow. He loved his life on the ranch, yet he could not escape the feeling that something was missing. There was a quiet yearning in his heart, a longing for companionship, for someone to share his days with, even in the simplest ways. He sighed and closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm of life around him, hoping that somehow the quiet ache in his heart would be answered. Spring had just begun to touch the wide Arizona plains. The air was warmer, the dry grass showed hints of green, and wildflowers peeked shyly from the cracks in the earth. Elias Harper went about his morning chores as usual, feeding the cattle, checking the fences, and inspecting the water troughs. Life on the ranch was demanding, but it had a comforting rhythm. Yet on this particular morning, something felt different. There was an unusual stillness, a sense that the day was about to bring a change he had not expected. As Elias adjusted the latch on the old barn gate, he noticed movement at the edge of the property. 4 figures emerged from the trail that led from the nearby reservation. At first, he thought they might be neighbors or perhaps travelers passing through, but as they drew closer, he realized these were women he had known casually for many years. 4 Apache widows who had lost their husbands long ago. Their faces were lined with age and experience, their eyes carrying stories of grief, strength, and resilience. Elias had always respected them from afar, greeting them politely when paths crossed, but he had never imagined they would come together to visit him on the ranch. The women approached with a quiet determination, carrying small baskets filled with herbs, dried fruits, and carefully wrapped bundles of gifts. Their steps were steady and they moved as if they had an unspoken plan. Elias felt a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Good morning, Mr. Brand." "Harper," one of the women said, her voice warm yet firm. "We've come to see you," he nodded politely, still unsure of what to expect. "It's unusual for all of you to come together," he said, trying to hide his nervousness. The women exchanged glances, and the tallest of them spoke, her tone calm but serious. "We cannot let you be alone, Elias, not in these days of your life." Elias frowned. "Alone? I've managed just fine for years." He tried to sound confident, but a small tremor in his voice betrayed his unease. The women smiled gently, their eyes filled with understanding. "It is not only about managing, Elias. It is about being cared for, about having people to share your days with," another said. "We are here to help you, to be with you, and to make sure you are not forgotten." Elias was silent, unsure how to respond. The thought of accepting help from 4 women at once felt strange and even a little overwhelming. He had always been independent, proud of his ability to handle life on his own. Yet, deep inside, a small part of him recognized a longing he had tried to ignore for many years, the desire for companionship, for human connection, for someone to share the quiet moments of life. The women explained what had brought them together. According to a custom they had learned from their families, a person who had lived a long life and faced solitude could be claimed by those willing to care for him in his final years. The word "claimed" sounded unusual to Elias, and he raised an eyebrow. "Claimed?" he repeated. The women nodded, their expressions gentle but resolute. "It is not about marriage in the way you may think," one said. "It is about support, care, and shared life. We have decided that you should not spend your remaining days alone. We want to be your family." Elias felt a swirl of emotions. He was flattered, confused, and, in some ways, deeply moved. He had never expected that 4 women, each with their own life and stories, would come together to offer him such a gift. Yet, his pride made him hesitant. "I appreciate your concern," he said slowly, "but I've always lived alone. I'm used to it. I don't want to trouble anyone with my life or my problems." The women shook their heads, their expressions patient. "It is no trouble, Elias. We are not here because it is convenient. We are here because it is right. Life is meant to be shared, and even in your later years, you deserve warmth, friendship, and care." The first day passed with quiet conversation and small gestures. The women helped clean the house, arranged fresh flowers on the wooden table, and prepared a simple meal. Elias watched them move around with grace and efficiency, feeling a mixture of amazement and discomfort. He had never needed such help before, and the feeling of being cared for was both strange and comforting. As they sat together for dinner, sharing stories and laughter, Elias felt an unfamiliar sense of connection. He realized that even small acts of kindness, a hot meal, a warm blanket, a shared story, could lift the weight of loneliness that had settled over him for so many years. The next few days brought more adjustment. Elias learned the women had their own routines, habits, and ways of seeing the world. One loved to sing softly while working, another had a talent for storytelling, and a third taught Elias about herbs and remedies he had never known. The 4th woman shared her knowledge of the land, explaining how to preserve water and care for plants even in the harsh desert climate. At first, Elias felt awkward, unsure how to fit their presence into the life he had always led. But gradually, he began to see the benefits. The ranch, once quiet and still, was now filled with voices, laughter, and movement. The walls that had once echoed only his own footsteps now carried the warmth of company. One afternoon, while repairing a fence together, Elias noticed how the women worked seamlessly as a team. They respected his experience but offered help without hesitation. When a heavy post needed to be lifted, 3 of them coordinated their strength with his own, and the task was completed with ease. Elias felt a sense of humility and gratitude he had not known in years. He realized that asking for help was not a sign of weakness, but a form of connection. It was a lesson he had resisted for too long. As days turned into weeks, Elias's initial hesitation began to fade. He started to share more of his past, telling the women stories of his childhood, his life with Margaret, and the challenges of running a ranch. The women, in turn, shared their experiences, the joys and sorrows of raising families, losing loved ones, and finding strength in each other. These exchanges created bonds that went beyond mere companionship. They became a family of choice, formed not by blood, but by mutual respect, care, and understanding. The turning point came one evening when Elias felt a sudden weakness while walking to the barn. His legs trembled, and for the first time he realized how fragile he had become. The women were there immediately, supporting him, offering water, and guiding him safely to the porch. In that moment, Elias understood the depth of their commitment. It was not simply about presence, it was about vigilance, about caring for someone as one would care for oneself. The fear he had once felt about losing independence began to shift. He realized that life could still be meaningful, even if it meant relying on others. By the end of the first month, the ranch had transformed in small but profound ways. Meals were shared regularly, chores became easier, and the air carried a warmth that had long been absent. Elias's solitude was replaced with laughter, conversation, and companionship. The women had become more than caretakers. They were friends, confidants, and family. And Elias, for the first time in decades, felt that his life had purpose beyond the routine of work. He was needed, appreciated, and loved in a way he had not thought possible in his later years. Yet, even amid the growing comfort, challenges remained. Elias sometimes struggled with his pride, occasionally insisting on doing tasks alone or retreating into quiet reflection when emotions grew overwhelming. The women, patient and understanding, allowed him space while gently encouraging him to accept their help. They respected his dignity, never forcing him into dependence, but always present to offer support. Through this delicate balance, Elias began to understand a truth he had long ignored. Accepting care is not weakness, and companionship can enrich life at any age. By the end of spring, the ranch was no longer just a place of work. It had become a home filled with connection, support, and shared life. The once lonely rancher had begun to experience the joys of being part of a chosen family. And while the future remained uncertain, Elias Harper realized that his days, once thought to be solitary, could now be filled with warmth, friendship, and the quiet happiness that comes from being cared for and caring in return. Days turned into weeks, and spring slowly gave way to the warmer days of early summer. Elias Harper had grown accustomed to the presence of the 4 Apache widows on his ranch. Their arrival, once a surprising and confusing event, had become a part of his daily life. Each morning he would rise to the sound of their gentle voices calling from the kitchen, or the quiet hum of a song while someone swept the porch. At first, the sounds had startled him. He was so used to silence that even small noises seemed louder than they were. Now, those sounds had become comforting, like the rhythm of the land itself. Despite the growing comfort, Elias struggled with the idea of being cared for. He had lived so long as a man of independence that relying on others felt unnatural. His pride often made him insist on doing tasks alone. He would refuse to sit while the women carried heavy firewood or insisted on leading the cattle himself. Yet, each time he tried to act completely on his own, he found the women quietly guiding him, offering help without pressure. It was not intrusive, it was supportive. And slowly, Elias realized that their care did not diminish his strength. It enhanced it. One afternoon, Elias decided to take a walk to check the farthest corner of his land, where an old fence needed repair. The sun was hot, and the wind carried the smell of dry grass and sage. As he trudged across the field, his legs felt heavier than usual, and his chest tightened slightly. The ranch had always been demanding, but today It seemed to test him more than ever. Just as he paused to catch his breath, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Turning, he saw the tallest of the widows standing beside him, her face calm and understanding. "You don't have to do this alone, Elias," she said softly. "Let us help." Elias swallowed, fighting the familiar urge to insist he was fine. But the truth was undeniable. He was tired, and his body needed support. He nodded quietly, allowing her to guide him back toward the barn. On the way, the other 3 women joined, each offering a small piece of advice, encouragement, or simply their presence. Elias felt a warmth in his chest that he had not felt in years, a sense of being cared for, not out of obligation, but out of genuine concern and affection. Over the next few days, this incident became a turning point. Elias began to accept that his life could be shared, and that doing so did not make him weak. He started allowing the women to take more responsibility in daily tasks. They cooked meals together, cleaned the house, and even tended to minor repairs around the ranch. Elias was amazed at how smoothly life flowed when they worked as a team. The ranch felt alive in a way it hadn't for decades. The air carried laughter and stories, and even the cattle seemed calmer in the presence of the women, who moved among them with gentle care. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, Elias found himself sitting on the porch, watching the women prepare a simple dinner. He noticed the way they moved together, coordinated without words, respectful without hesitation. Each woman had her own strengths, her own wisdom, and together they formed a rhythm that made the ranch feel like a true home. Elias realized that he had underestimated the power of connection. The companionship he had avoided for so long was not a burden. It was a gift, one that enriched every aspect of his life. That night, after dinner, Elias sat by the fireplace while the women shared stories of their past. They spoke of love and loss, of resilience in the face of hardship, and of the ways they had cared for each other over the years. Elias listened quietly, occasionally sharing his own memories, tales of Margaret, of his children, and of the challenges of running the ranch alone. There was a gentle understanding in the room, a recognition that each of them had endured loneliness and hardship, and that they now had the chance to bring comfort to someone who needed it as much as they did. A few days later, a minor crisis tested the new bonds of trust. A sudden summer storm swept across the plains, bringing heavy rain and gusts of wind. The river that ran near the ranch swelled quickly, and one of the fences that separated the cattle from a steep ravine was damaged. Elias knew that if the fence failed, the animals could be in danger. Normally, he would have faced this challenge alone, working tirelessly through the storm. But now, he had support. The women sprang into action, helping him secure the fence, carrying materials and working with a determination that amazed him. Together, they managed to repair the damage before any harm came to the animals. Standing in the rain, soaked and exhausted, Elias felt a profound sense of gratitude. The women's strength had complemented his own. Their care had made the impossible possible. In that moment, he understood fully that accepting help did not mean surrendering independence. It meant embracing community. He began to see the value of shared life, the joy of companionship, and the comfort of knowing that he was not alone in facing the challenges of aging and running a ranch. As summer progressed, the emotional bonds between Elias and the women deepened. He began to wake in the mornings with a sense of anticipation, looking forward to the conversations, shared work, and simple joys of the day. He listened to their advice on caring for the land, tried new recipes with them, and even learned some traditional herbal remedies from their knowledge. The widows, in turn, learned more about ranch life, sharing in the satisfaction of a hard day's work completed together. Each day became a lesson in humility, patience, and gratitude. One quiet afternoon, Elias reflected on the journey so far. He realized that the turning point had not come from a single act, but from the accumulation of countless small moments. The hand offered when he was weak, the laughter shared over a meal, the quiet understanding when he needed space. He understood that his life, once solitary and lonely, had been transformed not by a dramatic event, but by the steady presence of those who cared. The ranch, once a place of isolation, was now filled with warmth, companionship, and a sense of family he had not thought possible in his later years. In private moments, Elias admitted to himself that he had been wrong to resist their presence. He had feared losing control, feared that accepting care would make him dependent. Now he realized that care and companionship did not diminish a person's worth. They enhanced it. He felt a growing sense of peace, a reassurance that even as he aged, he could live fully, surrounded by love and respect. The four widows had not just entered his life, they had changed it, showing him that community, compassion, and shared life were as vital in his later years as they had been in his youth. By the end of Part 3, Elias had reached a new understanding. He no longer questioned why the women had come or why they insisted on caring for him. He embraced their presence, their guidance, and their friendship with an open heart. The ranch had transformed from a place of solitude into a home of connection, laughter, and mutual care. Elias had begun to see that life's later chapters could be as meaningful, vibrant, and fulfilling as any other, provided one was willing to accept help, love, and companionship when offered. Summer was in full bloom, and the Arizona sun cast long golden rays across Elias Harper's ranch. The land, once quiet and lonely, now hummed with life and laughter. The mornings were filled with the sound of hens clucking, cattle lowing, and the gentle chatter of the four Apache widows who had become an inseparable part of Elias's life. Their presence had grown so natural that he could no longer imagine a day without them. They moved through the house and fields with a quiet strength, each one bringing her own warmth, skill, and spirit. Together they created a rhythm that made the ranch feel alive, safe, and full of love. Yet even as life flowed smoothly, Elias knew that the true test of their bond had not yet come. He had learned to accept help in small ways, to enjoy shared meals and conversation, and to allow the widow's care to ease his work on the ranch. But he had not fully allowed himself to embrace the deeper emotional connection that came with truly being part of a family again. That moment arrived unexpectedly, as moments of truth often do. One late afternoon in the middle of a heat wave, Elias was checking the water troughs for the cattle when he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. The world seemed to tilt, and he leaned against the wooden fence for support. For the first time, fear gripped him. Not fear of the work, or the weather, or the long days of ranch life, but a deep, honest fear that he might be alone in facing something he could not handle by himself. He called out weakly for help, and almost immediately the four women appeared, rushing to his side with calm but urgent energy. Their faces were filled with concern, their hands steady as they guided him to the shade and made him sit down. In that moment, Elias felt the full weight of what the widows had brought into his life. They were not just companions or helpers, they were his protectors, his family. Each woman worked instinctively to care for him, offering water, holding his hand, and speaking softly to calm his fears. He realized that he had been resisting this level of connection for too long, that he had feared vulnerability even as his body demanded support. Now, there was no choice but to accept it, and in doing so, he felt a strange and wonderful relief. He was not alone. He had not been abandoned by life. Over the next few days, Elias recovered under the careful attention of the women. They encouraged him to rest, prepared nourishing meals, and reminded him gently to take his medication. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to depend fully on others. He watched the women move through the house and ranch, their gestures filled with care, patience, and love. In quiet moments, he noticed small details, the way one of them brushed back her hair when laughing, how another hummed softly while cooking, or how another carefully tended to the garden outside the porch. These details, simple as they were, filled his heart with warmth he had not thought possible in his later years. One evening, as the sky turned brilliant shades of pink and orange, Elias sat on the porch with the women gathered around him. They had prepared a simple meal of roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and herbal tea, and the air smelled of sage and warm bread. He looked at each of them, truly seeing them for the first time, not just as helpers or friends, but as individuals with lives, stories, and hearts that now intertwined with his own. The realization struck him fully. He had been given a second chance at family, at companionship, and at love. Not romantic in the usual sense, but a deeper, more enduring connection that filled the gaps his solitude had left. As dinner ended, the women shared stories of their pasts, tales of husbands lost, hardships endured, and lessons learned over a lifetime. Elias listened intently, recognizing the courage, resilience, and wisdom each woman carried. Then he spoke, sharing memories of Margaret, of his children, and of the long years spent on the ranch alone. His voice trembled at first, but it steadied as he spoke from the heart. For the first time in decades, he cried openly, and the women did not shy away. They held his hands, touched his shoulders, and allowed the emotion to flow freely between them. It was a moment of pure honesty, of connection, of shared humanity. The next morning brought a quiet revelation. Elias woke early and walked among the cattle, noticing how naturally the women moved through the fields, their laughter carrying across the land. He realized that he had been living in a kind of emotional isolation, even while physically present in the world. He had feared dependence, feared vulnerability, feared letting others into his life. Now he understood that true strength was not in doing everything alone, but in sharing life, work, and emotion with those who cared deeply. He felt a sense of peace he had not known since his youth, a calm assurance that he was valued, needed, and loved. Throughout that summer, the bond between Elias and the widows continued to deepen. They celebrated small victories together, like fixing a stubborn fence, planting a garden, or teaching each other new skills. They mourned small setbacks together, like a sick animal or a failed crop, offering comfort, advice, and shared effort. Every day brought small lessons in humility, gratitude, and joy. Elias learned to laugh again, to appreciate the beauty of shared silence, and to recognize that family could be formed in ways beyond tradition or bloodlines. One particularly memorable day, the women surprised Elias with a small celebration. They had prepared a picnic in the shade of an old oak tree near the creek, with food, blankets, and small gifts. Elias was overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness, realizing how much care and planning they had put into making him feel special. They laughed, shared stories, and even danced lightly in the grass, their joy infectious. For Elias, it was a revelation. Life's later years could be filled with happiness, connection, and love, if only one allowed oneself to accept it. By the end of summer, Elias's heart had fully opened. He no longer resisted the presence of the women, no longer questioned their care, no longer clung stubbornly to a life of solitary pride. He recognized that he was part of a family, an unconventional family perhaps, but one built on love, respect, and shared life. The ranch, once a place of quiet labor and loneliness, was now a home overflowing with warmth, laughter, and companionship. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a desire to care for them as they cared for him, and a profound gratitude for the second chance at life they had offered. Elias realized that the true climax of his journey was not a single event, but the culmination of trust, care, and shared experiences. The emotional peak was in the everyday moments, preparing meals together, working the fields side by side, sharing stories by the fire, or simply sitting quietly in each other's company. These moments, small and ordinary, were extraordinary in their ability to heal loneliness, create bonds, and restore hope. In allowing himself to accept care and companionship, Elias had rediscovered the heart of life itself, connection. By the time the sun set on another warm summer evening, Elias Harper felt whole in a way he had not for decades. The four Apache widows, once strangers who had boldly entered his quiet life, had become his chosen family. Their presence had transformed the ranch into a home, his solitude into shared joy, and his pride into gratitude. The emotional peak of his journey had arrived. He was loved, he was cared for, and he had discovered that even in the later chapters of life, happiness and connection were possible when one opened the heart. Autumn began to settle over the Arizona plains, painting the landscape in soft shades of gold, amber, and rust. The heat of summer gave way to cooler mornings, and the breeze carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves and dry earth. On Elias Harper's ranch, life had settled into a comfortable, joyful rhythm. The once lonely rancher had come to embrace the presence of the four Apache widows, and together they had formed a family unlike any other. Their laughter, chatter, and shared effort had turned the ranch from a place of isolation into a home filled with warmth, connection, and meaning. Elias had learned to see the value in the simplest of moments. Morning chores were no longer solitary tasks, but shared experiences. The sound of voices across the fields, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen, and the sight of hands working together to mend fences or feed the cattle had become a source of comfort and joy. He often paused to watch the women work, noticing their care, skill, and dedication. Each woman brought her own strengths to the ranch. One tended the garden with precision. Another prepared meals that reminded him of home. A third cared for the animals with gentle patience, and the fourth offered wisdom and encouragement that balanced the group. Together they created harmony and efficiency, and Elias could not help but feel immense gratitude for their presence. Over time, Elias began to reflect on how dramatically his life had changed. A few months ago he had believed that his days would end in quiet solitude, surrounded only by the sounds of the ranch and the memories of the past. Now his days were filled with conversation, shared work, laughter, and the comforting knowledge that he was cared for. He realized that the loneliness he had long accepted was not a necessity but a choice he had unconsciously made. Life had offered him companionship, but it had taken courage and humility to accept it. The four widows had given him not only care, but also the opportunity to experience life anew, to see that even in later years there was joy, connection, and purpose waiting to be embraced. One crisp morning, Elias woke earlier than usual and walked to the top of the hill that overlooked the ranch. From this vantage point, he could see the wide expanse of his land, the winding trails, the pastures, and the barns that had been a part of his life for decades. The morning light cast long shadows and painted the land in soft hues of gold. As he stood there, he thought about the journey he had taken over the past months, the moments of fear, hesitation, acceptance, and finally, profound connection. He understood that the turning point had not come from a single dramatic event, but from the accumulation of countless small acts of care, kindness, and shared experience. Each day with the women had strengthened him, healed old wounds, and reminded him that human connection was the most powerful force in life. Later that day, Elias joined the women in the kitchen. Together they prepared a large meal, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, and kneading dough. The room was filled with the rich aroma of cooking, the sound of laughter, and the occasional playful argument over whose way of preparing a dish was best. Elias smiled as he moved from task to task, no longer feeling awkward or out of place. He had learned to participate fully, to share both effort and joy, and to value the presence of others in his life. The shared meal that followed was more than nourishment. It was a celebration of companionship, resilience, and the bonds that had formed between them. Over the following weeks, the rhythm of life on the ranch continued to evolve. The women and Elias worked together to prepare for the coming winter, repairing fences, stacking firewood, and tending to the animals. They shared stories from their past, teaching and learning from each other, and finding common ground in experiences of love, loss, and resilience. Elias found himself laughing more freely than he had in years, finding joy in the simplicity of daily life and the warmth of shared moments. He recognized that these experiences, small as they might seem, were the essence of living fully, even in the later chapters of life. Elias also noticed the impact of the women's presence beyond the ranch. Neighbors and friends who had once seen him as a solitary figure now visited more often, drawn by the lively, welcoming atmosphere. Children played in the fields, listening to stories and learning about the land. Animals thrived under the careful attention of the widows and Elias. The ranch, once quiet and isolated, had become a hub of life, energy, and community. Elias realized that by allowing himself to accept help and companionship, he had not only enriched his own life, but had also brought vitality to the wider world around him. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of oranges and reds, Elias sat on the porch with the women gathered around him. They spoke quietly about the past, their memories, and the lessons they had learned over the years. Elias felt a deep sense of gratitude and love for these women who had transformed his life. He thought about Margaret, his late wife, and how the memory of their life together had prepared him to recognize the value of connection, even with new people. He understood that love and care could take many forms, not only in romantic relationships, but in friendship, shared purpose, and the willingness to nurture and be nurtured in return. In those quiet moments, Elias reflected on the lessons he had learned. He had discovered that pride and stubborn independence could keep one isolated, while humility and openness could create bonds that enriched every day. He had learned that it was never too late to accept help, to form new connections, or to embrace life fully. The ranch had become more than a home. It was a symbol of resilience, community, and the enduring power of human care. He felt a profound peace, knowing that he would not face the later years of life alone. As autumn deepened, the ranch became a place of celebration and reflection. The women and Elias hosted small gatherings, sharing meals and stories with neighbors, children, and travelers who passed by. The ranch became known not just for its cattle and land, but for the warmth, laughter, and sense of family that filled it. Elias took pride in this transformation, recognizing that the life he had built with the women was a legacy far greater than any physical structure or herd of cattle. It was a legacy of love, compassion, and shared humanity. In private moments, Elias often walked alone to the far edges of the ranch, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the fear and hesitation he had felt when the women first arrived, the moments of doubt and pride that had held him back, and the turning points when he had allowed himself to trust and accept care. Each memory was a reminder of the power of human connection and the importance of embracing life fully, regardless of age or circumstance. By the end of the year, Elias Harper had experienced a transformation that went far beyond the physical care he had received. He had discovered a deeper understanding of life, family, and love. The 4 Apache widows, once strangers, had become his chosen family, guiding him, supporting him, and sharing in the joys and challenges of each day. Elias had learned that life's later chapters could be rich, meaningful, and full of happiness, provided one opened the heart to connection, acceptance, and care. The ranch, once a place of quiet labor and solitude, was now alive with warmth, laughter, and love. The walls echoed with stories, the fields carried the sounds of work and play, and the air was filled with the scent of cooking, flowers, and sage. Elias Harper, who had once faced the possibility of spending his final days alone, had found a family that gave life new meaning. The emotional and practical care of the widows had transformed not only his daily life, but his heart and spirit. As winter approached, Elias knew that the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. He understood that companionship, care, and shared life were among the most valuable gifts one could receive, and he resolved to honor the women who had brought these gifts into his life. Together they would face the challenges of aging, the demands of the ranch, and the beauty of each passing day. The story of Elias Harper, the lonely rancher who once believed he would face his final days alone, became a story of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of human connection. In the quiet moments before sleep, Elias often looked around his home, seeing the four women preparing for the night, hearing their soft laughter, and feeling the warmth of their presence. He realized that life, even in its later years, could be rich, vibrant, and full of love. The ranch had become a home, a sanctuary, and a testament to the strength of community, care, and chosen family. And as he closed his eyes each night, Elias Harper knew that he had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to live fully, surrounded by love, respect, and companionship.